Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa, and today I am working on my first alcohol marker piece. Now, as I was doing my research to figure out how to use these markers, I first looked up what sort of paper I should use in case, like with my watercolors, I need to have special paper and things like that. So the first video I found said that as long as I didn't use watercolor paper or mixed media paper, which were made to absorb a lot of liquid and so would sap all the ink out of my markers, I could use sketchbook paper, marker paper, whatever other kind of paper I wanted, and it'd be fine. So I went with it and I did my sketch on sketchbook paper, and then I lined my sketch on sketchbook paper, which was quite a lot of work. And then I got a comment from Carrie Woodhouse on my haul and she said that she really didn't appreciate alcohol markers until she used them on bleed-proof marker paper. And so I was like, oh, this might not work as well as I have planned. And then, as I was sitting down to actually use the markers on this piece, I went and watched some tutorials by Draw with Jazza. But he said that he always uses, I believe it's called blending card or something like that. And that if you use other things like sketchbook paper, those are actually some of the worst things because they will absorb all of the ink and the ink will be dry and then it won't let you blend, which is one of the primary pros of using alcohol markers, is that you can blend them once they're on the page. So at this point I was like, oh drat, this is not gonna work. But I started off anyway, and I used yet another tutorial to work on the skin tone for this character. I've never done skin tones along with everything else in Copic markers, and the skin and the face particularly are the parts that you particularly don't want to mess up on. So I looked up Greatly Geeky had some really nice facial skin tutorials with Copics that I remembered her posting a while ago, so I went and looked that up, and that was very helpful. That was why I first outlined her face with the one darkish brown and then went over her entire face with it again, so that it would be like a double layer of that brown around the edges and the places where I was thinking of putting shadow, and it would sort of blend into a thinner coat of that ink for the rest of her face. And I think that part actually worked pretty well. Then I used the darker brown that I had to do a few more shadows, like around her eyebrows and the edge of her nose and things. And then I couldn't see the difference between the light and the shadow because there just weren't shadows dark enough to make the lighter parts pop. And so then I remembered that I had seen on Twitter someone talking about how when you are doing art of black people's faces, it is especially important to get the highlights right, and that their faces aren't so much defined by shadow like white people's faces are, or other lighter skinned people. Their faces are more defined by where the light hits and how the light reflects off their faces. And so I decided to calm down and not freak out that the face was terrible, that I would make it look defined with my highlights later using my gel pens. And so then I started working on the dress, basically just using every different color of pink marker that I had, which, you know, out of the number of markers that I have, to have 4 different types of pink, I appreciated that. Although one thing that was weird was that some of the colors were spot on to what the cap color was, and some of them were totally different. Like the middle of her skirt, which is the same marker that I used for her bodice, the marker cap is very much a blue tone pink, whereas the ink that actually came out is very much a peach tone pink. So that was very unexpected. So this particular brand, Firefly alcohol markers, it can be hard to predict what color you're going to get from the cap. Also, as for her pose, what's going on here is The original idea for the piece was that because I wanted to do a quick and fun illustration that would involve just playing around with a new type of medium I hadn't used before, I wanted to kind of reach back to what I used to draw in the ancient old days when I was just having fun as like a fairly small child. And that is, I would draw princesses with big old hoop skirts and loads of different layers on their skirts and things like that. So that's where her design came from. My favorite thing to do is read, so it'd be cool if she was a reading princess. And then I decided, what could she be doing with her other hand? Oh, I know. The other thing I really like that are cool are masquerade masks. So wouldn't it be fun if she had decided to stop in the middle of her masquerade ball and take off her mask so that she could read, because reading is more fun than having balls. So that's what's going on with that. And so eventually I was able to come back around when all my inking had dried and use those gel pens on her face and her hair, and I think that definitely made her have more definition. One thing about her face is that I would have rather had it so that I could blend in the lighter colors. You know, those contour maps, beforehand they look really weird before they're all blended in with the rest of the face and everything. Her face looks a little bit like it's a contour map that hasn't been fully blended in. But what with me using gel pens and not wanting to completely cover up the texture of the markers that I had already used, there wasn't much I could do about that. But I do think that overall it looks fairly good if you interpret the planes of her face as like a stylized, this is how it's supposed to look thing, instead of that it's an accident. And then about using the markers on this paper, as predicted by Jazza, they did not blend much at all. The place that I mainly tried to blend it was on her skirt, on the layer between the white lace layer and the crosshatchy pink layer. So I did what Jazza had suggested and put down the lighter layer first, then colored in the darker layer over it, then went over that with the light again to smear it around. And that worked to an extent in that it lightened where I had put the darker marker, but it did not manage to pull that ink into the lighter ink area enough to make a gradual gradient, which I'm fairly certain is because it had soaked into the paper already and wasn't going anywhere. Because of that, I fully intend to buy some blending card or whatever it is that Jazza uses and use some of that for my next piece. However, despite that, I'm actually quite pleased with how this piece turned out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!